this is great for your chickens, great for your pigs. Like they'll eat it up. But we're kind of smelling it and poking at it, and we're like, I think this is okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Big Thoughts, Little Talks, a show where I talk with people who are finding creative ways to turn obstacles into opportunity. In this episode, I talk with my good friend Razzi. We discuss the curious state of society, how he became a vegan, what it was like to inherit meat and cheese during the quarantine, and how he has been reducing food waste and pushing the boundaries of what is considered edible. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the first episode of whatever I'm doing, whatever this podcast is.
Oh, is that the official name?
Maybe.
Whatever I'm doing.
Whatever I'm doing. Whatever I'm feeling myself podcast. So, what's been on your mind recently?
Been thinking about the state of society in the pandemic and how a lot of the functions have shut down, like a lot of businesses, like all the arts are closing. There's not like networking in person. And so like we're seeing this bifurcation of some people are like getting more into technology and like more online and making connections around the world. And then some people are working and like kind of holding the society on their backs and like struggling. Like if they don't have sick leave, they might get sick, but then have to choose between losing their job or like getting sick and spreading an illness, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think of myself as one of those people who can afford to stay inside. So I'm very fortunate to have a place and food and work that I can do online. But a lot of people don't have that and are struggling out there.
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit a couple days ago and mentioned it's really strange that there's that hierarchy of like it seems like as you go higher up, further and further away from the actual physical world and what happens, like the delivery and like the driving and the people who are on the front lines, like it seems like our society actually rewards those jobs more, and they're usually paid more and more the higher you go up.
Right.
But the people, the people with the luxury of working from home, staying at home, are also the ones that like they rely on the people that actually go in and put themselves at risk for any of their work to mean anything.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I've noticed, which is that being at home and working part time, I notice how much time it takes to cook all my meals. And basically that's time, like if I wake up, I mean there's some meals that are able to be cooked really fast, but like say I want to eat like a full salad with like cooked noodles and vegetables and like a sauce and everything, like essentially I might spend like an hour and a half preparing that food and then take like half an hour to eat and then another 15 minutes to clean up. And it's like, oh wow, it's like already 2:30 and like I'm starting to think about dinner. So I think about how all of those hours that I now spend cooking have previously been just like handed to me by like going to a restaurant. And there's some aspect of economy of scale, like a restaurant can have like a big pot of curry and then just like scoop out individual servings. But in this time, like, yeah, I find that I'm like cooking almost constantly, and it's actually something I really enjoy. And like I mentioned, I'm only working part time, so I have the ability to spend a lot of time cooking. But it's interesting to think about how I'm subsidized, like my hours are subsidized by all these service workers if I go and eat out. And I was eating out when I was working full time, like just about every day.
Yeah. So actually, speaking of which, this is a good segue. One thing I want to talk about is learn a little bit more about uh, your culinary adventures during
Yeah.
this quarantine. And so, actually, for those who may not know you, because I know you have a lot of background with sustainability and vegetarianism, veganism, could you give like a brief maybe overview of your journey from like as early as you can remember to now?
Yeah. if you want the full scoop, check out my podcast, Terrible Vegan. But
Shout
I'll
out
give
Terrible Vegan Podcast sponsoring this video.
yeah, I'll give you the Redux version. So I actually was a really picky eater growing up, and I would eat like really like simple dishes and be like super hard to feed, I think. Like I remember going to Burger King and I was like, "Oh, the burger it's kind of like squishy and like oily. I don't want that." So what I had my mom order for me was a cheeseburger without the burger. So it was just a piece of cheese between two buns. And like my uncle
What
would try
about
to cook
the
for me.
vegetables? Like, did you include
Oh,
those?
those were just out of the picture, like completely out of the
So
question.
just
Like
cheese on bread.
cheese on bread, like anything that was like slimy. I mean, if you say slimy, it doesn't sound appealing, but like saucy, I guess. Like I didn't like sauces. Like I don't think I even tried mayo before high school. Like or like yeah, that sounds about right. Like I would go to sandwich shops and like just be super picky and like anything that was like somewhat wet, I would want to hold off on. And like mustard, I was like, oh, it just kind of like just tastes bad. So that was kind of like my youth, um, a little earlier on, and also in my youth was my church's fasting. So at some point I stopped being as much of a picky eater, and my parents' church would require. I mean, it's not like it's enforced or anything, but the idea is that you fast from all meat, dairy, eggs, just like pretty much a vegan diet for different seasons, like leading up to Christmas and leading up to Easter. So I had some experience with like eating vegan already and kind of like changing my diet for a abstract or like moral duty as opposed to like dietary restriction.
Mhm.
But then I was in high school. I actually just graduated high school. I I made up my mind to become a vegetarian while I was eating a steak, I think, at a diner. And I think I might have told you the story before, and it's a little bit of a strange story, but
I'm not sure if I've heard
I'll
this
tell
one.
it here. Yeah, it's and I don't think I told on Terrible Vegan either, so cool to get like a little like Terrible Vegan is more about the present. This is very much like the past. Um, but I was in this diner, and the previous day I had just seen the movie Super 8, which is about an alien that shows up on Earth, and like it's like a big alien and like kind of like a monster movie. So in one of the scenes, the alien's like capturing people and has like this underground layer. And this is total spoilers. So oops for those of you who are getting ready to see Super 8 and listening to this podcast. I hope the Venn diagram overlap is very small. But yeah, basically the alien has these humans hanging from its lair from the ceiling, and the image of that was very much like a slaughterhouse image that I had seen in a like mini documentary that Tom York did. I'd be curious to go back and try to find that link, but he's vegan and he was making a case for like look at these conditions. This is where your meat comes from. Think about it.
Yeah.
So that documentary and the Super 8 movie made me become vegetarian. I also had a friend who I really looked up to who was vegetarian, and he always did it like it was nothing. So I was like, oh, that's so cool.
So actually, I think you have told this story before, but hearing it again, actually, I'm curious. Like, what was the way you tell the story? It seems like it was a very pivotal moment. Like you saw this
Hmm.
movie, and then like like in that instant, you sort of like had this resolve. Like, what was the actual? Was it kind of like that, or was it an instant like change of heart, or had this been building up for some time, or did it take some
I
time
think
after the movie?
I think it took some time to build up. Like vegetarianism was already something that I had thought about, and I had a friend who voluntarily went vegetarian for a little while, and I remember like seeing the food that he was eating, and he was like saying it was fine, and so like I had kind of already had that exposure, and then when I watched the movie, I think it was at night, and then it wasn't until the previous day that I really put it all together, like while I was watching Super 8, I wasn't thinking like, oh man, I can't be eating meat. It was very much like after the fact, I was like thinking about the movie while I was eating meat, and then yeah, it was while I was eating a steak, and of course I wish that I could say, I mean, not even like I wish, but in some universe I might have said, and that was the last time I ever ate meat. But as you'll see if you listen to Terrible Vegan, I do still eat meat sometimes, and that actually reminds me of a quarantine story, which is how we've been eating here in Nicole's place, who I'm dating in Berkeley. So she's a student and she lives in this college house, and it's off campus, but it's mostly college students and recent grads who live here. And what happened was Berkeley's campus shut down early March, so then everything moved to online. And then cases of coronavirus started to grow in the US, and like California, I think it was San Francisco that first declared a state of emergency. And that was like a very early like declaration.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of places, like, even at the time, it's kind of like, what? Like, I don't know anyone who's got it. Like, what's the big deal? But I think that it was a good move that they did that so early. I'd have to pull out a calendar or look at some news reports to see exactly the sequence. But basically, it started to, like, the city started to mobilize and the roommates started to leave because they're like college students or recent graduates. They went to their family houses, and everyone left this house except for Nicole and Kat, her roommate.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I was living elsewhere in Berkeley, and I had been hanging out with Nicole pretty regularly, and I had this realization that if we were going to keep seeing each other, that it would be increasingly hard to justify if I was living in one house and then I would go out into public and see her and like interact with her disease biome and then go back to my old place. So we talked about it and I just moved in. And the day that I moved in was the day that the Bay Area declared shelter in place. So that's kind of the backstory. But then what we were essentially left with was a college house with 6 people worth of food and only 3 people. And of the people that lived here, or like the people that left, I don't know if any of them were vegetarian or vegan, but there was like a lot of meat in the fridge and a lot of cheese in the fridge. So one of the first things that we did was we like made like turkey and just cooked it in a pan. I don't remember exactly. Oh right, yeah. It's kind of it's like the ultimate in non-vegan. We made turkey quesadillas. They had blocks of cheddar cheese and tortillas and turkey. And also a funny thing about this is that I try hard to avoid plastic in the food that I consume. And the turkey came in plastic, the cheese came in plastic, the tortillas came in plastic. But it's like, well, it's all going to expire. Like no one's coming back for probably until the lease is up, which is the end of May. So um, let's dig in. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a terrible vegan's paradise.
yeah,
Well, so I'm
just like
actually
oh,
on a,
forced to eat this food.
I am curious though, like what is like how do you feel like how did you feel when you were baking and eating those turkey quesadillas? Like do you still have some like hesitation around that or is it do you feel mostly
I feel entirely
fine?
justified.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
I think that's right.
the 3 people that live here are all at least vegetarian. I think Nicole and I are vegetarian or vegan, and yeah, it's that's
Who
quite a
knows these
Freudian
days?
slip. Yeah, but I think Kat's vegetarian, and so it's like the people who this belongs to are not going to eat it, and yeah, it's like we're not just going to let it go bad and then throw it away. Like that would not help anyone. So it was kind of like an interesting treat, and turns out that cheese is really fun to cook with. It's like melty and gooey and delicious.
Yeah, I wonder. So there's like a boundary you have to draw, though, right? Because uh, there are also we could argue like grocery stores that end up throwing away old meats, old cheese, and you could say
Yeah.
like there is a surplus, so doesn't it make sense to just buy meat? Um, but
Right.
then there's
Right.
the argument of, okay, well, if there is more supply, um, or if there's more demand, then they'll create more supply. So like
Yeah.
hopefully over time, the effect on the supply chain is that there'll be less demand for meat. Um, I'm
Yeah.
curious, like where do you draw that boundary? Like, is it like after it's been bought, put in the refrigerator, and then
Yeah. I think the money is the big thing. And like one thing I've thought about is that it's okay in some sense to have like a meat production like farm and just have it be like very like light on resources, like if the animals are treated well, if it's not like a concentrated feeding organization. Like there are people on this planet that like live in rural areas and they grow chickens and they eat chickens, and that I don't really have a problem with because it's not like part of this giant food system of concentrating like animals and then like they produce a ton of waste and it's like too much for the natural system to process, so they have to like pack it up and ship it or like just have runoff into the water bodies.
yeah,
Bless you.
thank you.
Um,
Yeah, so it's more of the
so
machine, like the
yeah, it's the
industrial machine.
factory farming that's the problem, and like it produces a ton of greenhouse gases, especially cows, to produce that meat and that milk. Um, I can't actually really remember the question, so please enlighten me.
Um, I can't remember either, but it reminds me of another question I had, which is
Oh, great.
you've shared with me last time we talked a couple of very creative ways of making the most out of the food that you have. I'm curious if you share a couple of like what's one of the let's start with what's like the most creative dish that you think you've made during this quarantine so far.
Yeah. Oh man, so many creative dishes. Where do I start? Um, I think that the the most like it was a recipe, but it's kind of like the one that you wouldn't really expect that there's like good food there is banana peel bacon. So one of the roommates had left a couple of bananas, and we ate the bananas. And I think at the time I had already heard of this idea of banana peel bacon, so I put them in the fridge, the banana peels, and they just kind of sat there for like a couple of days. And then
To
I was
marinate a little bit.
reminded, yeah, yeah, they were pretty brown by the time I got to them, but just in the like a brown banana peel can kind of have a vanilla smell, so not necessarily gross, but yeah. So then Kat, the roommate, reminded me of this recipe that I brought up, and I was like, all right, let's do it. So I made banana peel bacon, and I'll just give a quick. I'm not gonna like do a full recipe, but I'll just say in brief steps what I did. So you have the banana peels, and you want to scrape out all of the pectin, I think it's called, like the white stuff on the inside. Um, and then that we actually set aside, and later Nicole put that in a fruit smoothie just to give it some more fruit volume. So very
Wow, I didn't even know that
very
part. That's
yeah,
didn't even throw away the pectin.
yeah, gotta hold on to that good stuff. So then we had just these like thin banana peel exteriors, and the first thing that we did was put a pan of hot oil and essentially fry them in oil. And then they started to like become crispy. And then they also started to like absorb the oil, so they're kind of like potato chips. And then we took those crispy banana peels, put them on a baking pan, and made a sweet like sauce. I can't remember all the ingredients, but it definitely had maple syrup and some spices. So it was like a dark, sticky, sweet sauce, and just like put it all over the bananas, and then baked it. So by the end, it was like fried and baked, and essentially the banana peel itself had just become a vehicle for fat and for sauce, which is great.
Hmm.
Um, and it just basically tasted like potato chips, but like with a little bit of plantain taste. So it was quite good. It looked kind of gnarly because it was like they were already brown and then they were like fried and they were baked and the sauce was black and they kind of turned black. We made some jokes about this was like the devil's food,
Yeah,
but
the photo you sent me definitely looked uh, like not quite recognizable as food, but
but you could see the banana peel shape.
that's true. That's true. So I'm curious though, like, would you eat it again?
Oh, definitely.
So like you would make this again next time you have banana peels.
Yeah, and it might get pretty gnarly because we have some frozen bananas in the freezer that are like very old, and they're great for banana bread. So we'll definitely make the banana bread. But then I'm not sure how those really old frozen banana peels are gonna fare. Like I'm worried that if I put them into oil, they would just like disintegrate because they're like super old and like cracked with ice. So we'll see.
Well, that's
But
interesting.
I
I
have high
didn't
hopes.
know. I was curious if this was more of like a let's experiment and like a one time thing, but it actually sounds like something that people can do at home.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to try. And like worst case, you lose a little bit of oil and sauce, but I was very happy with the result. And it's kind of like potato skins. Like thinking back to my picky eater early self, I would be like, oh, they're so rough, they're so hard. But now I'm like, yeah, potato skins are great because they like soak up the oil and like you can really bake them with high heat and get like a really crispy taste.
Yeah, dude. Pretty soon you'll just be buying bananas and like throwing away the banana and just freezing,
Yeah.
saving the peels.
Yeah, just another fun adventure in the kitchen. Um, so Nicole has taught me the virtues of stock making, which is very cool. It's like if you're peeling an onion, or you can use potato skins for this, squash skins, garlic skins, anything that's like, or like even some of like the hard like stems of things like collard greens, like various vegetables. They are good for soup, and you don't uh, necessarily want them to be in your soup, but the flavor can come off into a broth if you make stock. So the idea is like while you're preparing food, just have like a bag and almost like a compost bag, but you just put like edible or like not, well, this like ends of stuff like skins and peels, and you put them in a freezer bag. Then once you've collected enough of it, you put it in a crock pot, put some water, and then leave it on for like overnight, like 8 hours. And then and then you strain it, and you have basically soup broth. And then you can make soup with that, like noodle soup or potato soup.
Hmm.
Basically any soup. You already have a lot of the flavor. Like I've made soup before where like you start by sautéing onions and um, basically like cooking a bunch of vegetables and then like just like taking like adding water and then you have like a broth. But like you don't need to use fresh onions for that because you can get the same kind of flavor from the skin. So we've
Interesting.
been making soup stock for a while that way, and that's already a great resource use. But one day after we had gotten we like took it out of the crock pot, strained out the liquid, put that in jars, put that in the fridge for later. Then we had all this like all these rinds and ends just like in the crock pot still, and we're like, I wonder if you could eat this. And we kind of like smell it, and it's like, yeah, it kind of just smells like soup stock, which makes sense. I mean, it's been like soaking in the soup stock for a while. And yeah, it's like things like onion skins, but you know, like letting those soak for a long time, they've kind of gotten a little bit juicier. And so we get out our phones and we start searching online, and we're like, what can you do with like, we didn't even know what to call it. Like, is it like spent stock or stock ends? And eventually we find some forum, and then like
How deep
it's
in the
like a
internet is this? Like, is this is
it was like first page search results. You don't have to
okay?
go too
Okay.
far. You just got to know what you're looking for. Like, can you eat the stock ends? And there was like an almost unanimous consensus where people were like, "Oh, for humans, no. Like, this is great for your chickens. great for your pigs. Like they'll eat it up. And but we're kind of smelling it and poking at it, and we're like, I think this is okay. So what we did was we put it in the blender and just blended it around, and it got this like kind of like deep purple color, but like it wouldn't totally blend because like these are like really hardy ends of onions and stuff. Like the skins are like very tough. Like they're supposed to be like the outside of the vegetable. So it's like not breaking down fully. So we'd like take that out and like just kind of like slice it up with a knife. Like we tried cutting everything and then blending it and then like cut some more of it and blend it. And like we're just kind of like putting the blender on high and then shaking it around. And what we ended up with was this weird kind of like puree, and it was like not very tasty, but it wasn't that bad either. And this was like the first round of quarantine. Like we were just kind of trying to see how long we could survive on all the foods that we had. So we kind of like took a fork to it and then took a little bite. I'm like, yeah, it's edible. So we like put a ton of spices in it, just like salt, pepper, all sorts of anything that could just like make it savory and tasty. And then what we ended up doing that like really helped was I had a bunch of noodles that were like very like a lot of surface area on the noodles. They were like a bunch of layers. And then we just made the noodles and then poured the noodles into there. So at least it had like kind of a noodle texture.
You
But
sacrificed
man,
the
like
noodles too. I mean, you added the.
yeah, yeah, we cooked up the noodles, and it was like the final dish like wasn't that bad. Like it was kind of tasty. The only problem was that occasionally you would find like like the roots of an onion. It's just like really tough and like
Oh,
unsightly.
you didn't
So
even
you
cut
could,
out the roots of the onion.
no. So
Like
what
you pour with
happened
the
was like,
dirt on it, right?
oh, I mean, I think it probably didn't have dirt, but it would be okay if it did, just a little bit of dirt. Then those just kind of made it into the final dish. So then we would just like pick those out and throw those in the compost. So not a total resource reclamation, but yeah,
Wow,
we certainly
That's
made use of it.
that's a pretty epic. That's a pretty epic story, though. Like how, like when you read that, like when you saw the unanimous comments on the
Yeah.
forum, uh, what were the reasons for? Did they have particular reasons why humans couldn't eat it?
Um, I think it was basically like the flavor, like it's pretty bland because you've already like soaked out the flavor, and the texture is just terrible because it's like all these like skins and peels and like rough bits that like weren't originally like if you cook an onion, you like cut up all of the bits that you like kind of want to eat, and then what you have left is the skin. But we were eating essentially onion skins, garlic skins.
Yeah, that's I feel like you're charting new territory. You know, like this is
Yeah,
it's a there's some definitely like entrepreneurial spirit in this where everyone is telling you you can't do it, but then you're
right,
like,
right.
all right, I'm gonna push through uncharted territory a little bit.
Right, I'm gonna try.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I remember you also had mentioned last time we talked that you had some eggshells waiting for you in the fridge. I'm
Oh no,
curious. I'm curious what the fate of those eggshells were.
they're still waiting.
They're still waiting. Do you have any
Yeah,
ideas? Do you have any plans?
looking for that inspiration. So I think that like they're calcium essentially. So I think like I found a website where they were saying there were something like 50 uses for eggshells, and of course some of them are like feed them to your animals, but like one of them is like grind it up and essentially make a powder, and then you can like sprinkle that powder onto a food or like kind of maybe pack it into a capsule and take it like a supplement. It sounds kind of gnarly though, because like unless you really pulverize it, there's just gonna be a little piece of eggshell like that in your mouth. Like that's like a classic like amateur cooking thing. It's like, oh, you made an omelet, but look, there's a piece of eggshell. It's like crunch. Oh, gross. But I'm not too bothered by eggshells like as an ingredient. I just think I'd have to work really hard to crunch them down pretty good. and they've been sitting in the fridge for at least a week. So that's another variable. Yeah,
Wow.
that speaking of the entrepreneurial kind of mindset here, I've been having a lot of fun making a garden out of the various like plants that have been eaten by us. So like we eat a lot of apples, and I started to just take the seeds and put them in water, and then they kind of like push out of the like brown apple seed, and like this little green sprout will start.
This is
And
wait. You just put it in a glass of water.
yeah, I used a plate with just like a small layer of water. Like I didn't want them to be submerged in water.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think I got the idea from elementary school, where I think they gave us lima beans, and we just put like we took a paper towel and got it wet, and then put a lima bean in the middle and folded it over, and then that wet environment was like enough to get the beans sprouting,
Yeah, I
and
remember doing
then
that too. Like we would like
great,
put it in a Ziploc bag, tape it next to the windowsill or something.
yeah, make a little greenhouse.
Yeah. Actually, Kathleen read online that you can put green onions. You could just also put those in water. You could put
Yeah,
celery in water, and then they'll just start rooting, and then
yeah,
eventually. So I thought that you'd have to eventually put into soil, but apparently, according to her, like green onions can just grow entirely in water, which is
that's interesting.
interesting. Like I'm trying to think of like the biology of it. Like where does it get the like how can it grow? And I guess it's just getting it from like it can just grow from the carbon dioxide
Yeah.
in the air. But I thought it might need some nutrition from the soil.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, is there a limit to that? Like, would they just keep growing forever? I was actually talking to my dad, and he had some green onions. I don't usually buy green onions, but I cut the like edible part off the green onion, and then in the living room we had a plant, so I kind of stuck the green onion ends in the dirt, almost like a parasite in that like plant's area. And I talked to him the other day. He said they're still growing, so I guess that's just planting them in dirt, but they definitely can grow that way. And I have heard of people like putting them in water and sprouting them and resprouting them. It's like a renewable resource at that point. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. I think for some reason the quarantine it feels like there's like this. Maybe it's the inner farmer in us, in all of us.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, we must harvest, we must plant and sow our seeds.
Yeah.
Survival mode.
Yeah, like a World War II victory garden.
What's that? Haven't heard of that.
Oh, the idea that civilians, so they're like the soldiers overseas fighting whatever um, units and areas around the world, but the people back home, they were like, plant your victory garden today. And the idea is that you will support yourself through your own food, and then like the economy can provide food for the army,
Oh,
and
interesting.
like generally provide food security, because if we're like losing people to armies and wars, then we don't have as many farmers, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we have our quarantine gardens, and we will be
Yeah,
reaping
quarantine
the
gardens.
fruits.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm the lease here ends in May, so I might be carrying like just tons of little onion sprouts with me to my next place. We'll see how that goes. One story I have to share about my own little garden is we had a cabbage, and cabbage is a great quarantine food. Let me just pitch cabbage for a minute, because it's very hardy,
Hmm.
and you can store it in the fridge for weeks, and you can kind of peel away the outer leaves, and then like maybe the exact outer leaves are going to be a little brown and wilty, but like the inner leaves will still be good. So you can kind of eat it in layers. And we ended up with just like the bottom of the whole head of cabbage, because we pulled off all the leaves. And I was like, I don't really know how these things sprout. I don't know how cabbage seeds work, but what happens if I just put this in water? So kind of like those apple seeds, I just took the very base of the cabbage head
I don't even know
and
if
just
I've seen the base of a cabbage head. Like what is it? Is it just like it look like a tiny cabbage?
no, it's like there's like under the cabbage there's like a hard like circle, kind of like broccoli stem,
Okay, yeah, I
just
think
like
I know what you're talking about.
a plant like stem kind of thing.
Okay.
And so I put that in water, and in a few days, we started to see these little leaves start poking out from the sides. So I was like, oh man, I think each of those could become a head of cabbage. So I'm like super excited. I'm watering it. I'm looking at it like every day and like put it in the sun. It's looking super healthy. And the way that this house is set up is that there's a balcony on the second floor. So I went with my like little sprouting cabbage, and funnily enough, I actually took the turkey, the plastic container that the turkey was in, filled that with dirt from the yard, and then I put my cabbage in the dirt, and I was like, "All right, cabbage, you're gonna totally like grow, and it's gonna be great and beautiful." And then a couple of days later, I went outside, and it was gone, and the dirt had been kicked everywhere and like dug up, and I think a squirrel was just
Oh
excited to
no.
find a little cabbage head and just ate it up.
Oh man, that's tragic.
Yeah, so it's a tragedy, but supporting the local ecosystem.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. I feel like the I still think that you should start that cookbook, and
Yeah,
that would it would definitely be a lot of inspiration for people who are trying to save their like reduce their waste and save the planet
yeah,
and eat delicious at the same time.
exactly. You
That's
don't
the
have
most
to.
important part. So, as always, awesome talking with you. Is there anything that you want to leave our viewers with or listeners with?
Yeah, for the technologically minded viewers out there, I've been exploring the peer-to-peer web or the decentralized web. I'm using those terms interchangeably. Maybe someone who's more experienced can tell me why those are different or something. But there's one project that I recommend people check out, which is the Beaker browser. The idea is that it's a web browser that allows you to directly access other people's content on their computers, as opposed to going to a centralized server. Like if you type in google.com, it'll make a request to Google servers, and then Google will send you the content. If you're using something like the Beaker browser, you can use the DAT protocol, which will almost like BitTorrent look for who has the content on their computers and get it directly from there, which essentially makes the content harder to censor. It makes it more like potentially easier to host because you don't have to have a single host who's responsible. Like if you put it on, like if you make a post on Facebook and Facebook goes down, then no one can get your post. But if you distribute the content around, then people can get it from their peers. Of course, Facebook going down is kind of a rare occurrence, but down with Facebook.
um, cool. And if people wanted to reach out to you, get in contact to learn more about Terrible Vegan or your recipes or the Beaker browser,
Ooh, yeah.
how should they get in touch?
Check out my website. It has my email and my Twitter, razzi.abuissa.net. I'll let you spell that out, put in the show notes, whatever. So yeah, check out my blog. I don't have any recipes there yet, but that's a great prompt. Thanks for pushing me to go to the next level.
All right. So Razzi will have recipes on his website by the time this is published.
All right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll put your website in the show notes, and people can check that out. All right.
Cool.
Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Good to talk to you.